Welcome to the Ricky Mathews Show, where if you're a regular listener, you know by now, this is where we celebrate coastal Mississippi and the amazing people who are making this such a great place to live, work, and play. And by the way, we'll occasionally focus on Mississippi and leaders who are making a difference. We cover a wide range of topics here. Mostly the focus is on people making a difference. We'll talk to characters from time to time who are making a difference. We have a great show today, and we'll get to our guest here shortly. Hey, this morning I had the opportunity to speak at the American Heart Association CEO breakfast, and it was terrific. I got a chance to see a lot of my old friends, Anthony Wilson from Mississippi Power Company, Roy Anderson, a long list of others. Fofo Gillich was there, but it was an important meeting as David Machado, this year's chair, tells the story of their efforts to strengthen the American Heart Association and their work to make sure that people learn CPR and all the other work that the American Heart Association has been involved in for many, many years in terms of research, et cetera. And my daughter-in-law, Sierra, married to my son Jordan, and her daughter Mila joined me, and I told my story of having been a former paramedic, and I was in pre-med, was headed toward medical school at one point in my life, and made a change in my career objectives, and sort of the rest is history. But along the way, I got some great training as a paramedic that I've talked about on this show many times. And I told the story of the numerous times that I've had the opportunity to do CPR, including, unfortunately, or fortunately, really, because I was there, and it was a little divine intervention when my granddaughter Mila stopped breathing, and had the opportunity, the important opportunity to do mouth-to-mouth on her. And I told my story of CPR, my story of Mila, and Mila was there. She signed a card that went with these kits to all of the CEOs that were there. And she was so sweet and so happy to be there. And I was so glad to let them see her there smiling, because I think it makes a very compelling case for everyone, not just the folks that were at this meeting, but listeners, people who are really paying close attention to this show. That you need to learn CPR. CPR is so important, and you can save lives, and I've seen it over and over and over again. So I was honored to have the opportunity to participate, and it was good to see, again, so many of my old friends. And I wish the American Heart Association well as they continue to move forward with their fundraising efforts and their education efforts and their research efforts and all the things that they're involved in. So really, really important meeting this morning. So now let's shift gears. Let me invite my friend Erin Rosetti, who works as a communications kind of specialist for Memorial Health Systems. And she's become a good friend, and I'll tell you more about Erin here in just a second. But first of all, let me just say good morning. How you doing, Erin?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
It's good to see you. So listen, I've talked to several weeks now about these thought leaders that SuperTalk Mississippi Media News has developed across the state. A number of them are from coastal Mississippi, and it's been awesome having these conversations. Well, one of the ones that I'm really particularly excited about is something that actually came out of a meeting that I had on the air with some leaders of Coast Young professionals here in coastal Mississippi. And through my conversations with them, what evolved, though, was a series of conversations that led to a column that this group is writing collectively now for SuperTalk Mississippi News called Next Up. And Next Up's important because Next Up is not just necessarily about leaders that are kind of low on the totem pole, working their way through the community, which I think a lot of leaders are doing that, and that's important. But this group actually is identifying leaders that are going to be the next up. These are the ones that are going to be leading the chamber next. These are the ones that are going to lead the Coast Business Council next. These are the ones that are going to lead the American Heart Association next. They're literally ready to go. Are involved in multiple leadership programs here in coastal Mississippi, and they get together and they stay focused, and they are always thinking about brain drain and how do we keep people from leaving this area? How do we keep them here? What are the kinds of things we need to be talking about? They're talking about leadership development opportunities. I mean, the list really goes on and on. And now, so this group now, this Coast Young Professional Group, is involved in writing this Next Up column for SuperTalk Mississippi News, which will lead to them joining me on my show here, the statewide shows with Gerard and Paul. And there'll be thought leaders in the state. So the topics they'll be writing about aren't just applicable to coastal Mississippi. They're really applicable to the state. So I'm excited that they have a voice now in the conversation. And since so many state leaders pay attention to our shows, it really is a great way to sort of inject into the overall conversation that's taking place in Mississippi the topics that they will write about. So Jace Payne wrote the first one. He did a great job, and he joined me here on my show to talk about it. He's the current president of CYP, Coast Young Professionals. And Erin wrote the second column. But before we get to the column, which I think she did an incredibly good job at, I wanted to talk a little bit about her story. So, Erin, let's just start with this. Why don't you just describe to people what you do for Memorial?
Yep. So my role is internal and external communications, and that includes a lot, obviously. Every day is very dynamic. Media relations is a huge priority for me. Issues management, so really trying to be proactive versus reactive, working with stakeholder groups and outreach and everything that you can possibly imagine that is entailed in public relations and communication strategies. I'm going to have a hand in here.
Well, congratulations on your success. I came from digital media world, so I was a publisher for many years. I was a CEO for 16 years in the media industry and sort of helped manage this transition from traditional newspapers to more the digital media that we see today. But I often talk about that being the digital tsunami, that I was literally operating change efforts within the digital tsunami. But at the end of the day, that's really about how the information is getting delivered. And of course, the smartphone has really changed the way we receive information and the way we communicate. But the truth is, at the core of communication, it's still you still got to do your time, and you got to learn how to be a great communicator. So whether we're talking about 20 years ago or today, a lot of the methods for communicating, at least in terms of the words you use, are very similar. It's based on a lot of experience and a lot of mashing words and making sure that you're communicating the best message, in your case, for Memorial. But you got to get in the trenches, and you got to do your time to get to that point where you can sort of master it in a way. But none of us ever master it. It's the more we learn, the more we learn how much we don't know. But it keeps us learning more. But it is a dynamic field to be in, though, isn't it, Erin?
It is. Every day we're learning something new. As you know, social media evolves on a weekly basis, and all of our channels evolve on a weekly basis, and how our audience consumes media changes drastically from day to day. And what they find trustworthy and what they find relevant is also something that we have to contend with every day too. So we have to be empathetic. We have to be able to put ourselves in the shoes of our audiences and who we're targeting and be effective. And it's through relationship building. So I think that's the tenet, that's the core of what I do in public relations. I try to establish relationships and make them genuine. I always want to have a genuine relationship with someone. I want it to be credible. I want us to have synergy and be able to learn from each other. And that's what I love about what I get to do every day.
It's exciting. It's exciting to be able to share your story. But what's interesting is that if you take the collection of those of you who are involved in Coast Young Professionals, CYP, we'll refer to it as CYP from this point forward. For those of you who are involved in CYP, you each bring those valuable skill sets to the table, and the years of development and work in the trenches to get to that point, and you come together and you actually end up becoming sort of mentors to each other in a way, don't you?
Absolutely. That's a soundboard for me. I think you hear all the time about having your board of directors or your personal board of directors. And that's so very true. And it happens organically usually, which is it's very nice that it happens that way. But I respect and look up to people that are my age, that are younger than me, that of course are older than me and more seasoned. So it's a beautiful thing whenever you have a group of people come together and we all have ambitions and we want to grow as individuals, but also collectively. What the magic happens after that, right?
It really does. It's great that there's this mechanism that was developed years ago to give you guys the opportunity to network and get to know each other better, to be able to support one another in your careers, to be a sounding board, to talk about challenges in the community and what you might want to do, how you might address those challenges. But the evolution of these conversations that you guys have lead to substantive thinking about the future and how we might address those. And that's one of the next step column I think is so important. Hey, when we come back on the other side, I want to talk about Erin's early days in St. Martin and, where she grew up and went to school, et cetera, et cetera. We'll get into all that here after this. We'll continue our conversation with Erin Rosetti. We'll see you after this. Welcome back to Coast View. I'm visiting with my friend Erin Rosetti, who is a communications person, really important role she has at Memorial. And she's active in Coast Young Professionals, and she recently wrote what is essentially the second installment for the Next Up column, a column about young leaders emerging in the state. And it's been distributed across the SuperTalk news network. And I should also point out, there are 12 stations in the SuperTalk group as far as it relates to this particular channel. So there are 7 SuperTalk channels. But there are actually 26 radio stations in the family owned by SuperTalk Mississippi Media, various music platforms, including, for example, WCPR here in coastal Mississippi. But then in addition to that, there are 25 other stations, radio stations, that are part of the SuperTalk News Network. So that's 51 radio stations across this state that have access to SuperTalk Mississippi News. So you can understand when we're having important conversations that turn into news and they get distributed to all those other radio stations, that SuperTalk has the ability to have the important conversations and at least position it in a way that everyone across the state can have access to it. Then when you think about the multimedia aspect to it, this show actually airs on SuperTalk TV at C Spire TV across the state of Mississippi. And then you talk about YouTube and Facebook and the podcast platforms. This company is playing on a bunch of different cylinders. And I know, just from my own experience through SuperTalk Outdoors and through doing this show, the Ricky Mathews Show, I know that when we have important conversations that leaders in coastal Mississippi pay very close attention. Leadership in the state, the lieutenant governor, the governor's staff, the Speaker of the House, the state auditor, the secretary of state, they all pay very close attention to the conversations that are happening on this show. Our coastal legislative delegations paying attention, mayors are paying attention, city councils are paying attention. And that's the beauty of what SuperTalk has put together, the opportunity to have these conversations. And I can't think of a more important conversation to have than about leadership and the role that leaders need to play in our community to help us advance the ball. And that's what Erin and I will be talking about here shortly. So Erin, you grew up in St. Martin. Tell me a little bit about your early life and where you went to school, et cetera.
Yeah, I went to St. Martin School District. I actually started in the Diocese of Biloxi at Nativity and then transferred to St. Martin. So I grew up in kind of a rural area, so north of I-10, just by a bit, so very short distance to I-10. My grandpa was considered the last cowboy of North Biloxi, and he held that title proudly. I learned all about the stockyards and how to help with cattle from a young age. So I got to experience, the solitude of having a farm basically right next to me. And I grew up in St. Martin, and then I graduated from the high school in 2010. So I was really involved in the high school, of course. I took a lot of leadership positions throughout my time there. And I also worked at the Shed Barbecue and Blues Joint. That was a huge part of my high school experience. I spent a lot of weekends there and late nights there. But it definitely molded me, and it made me the person that I am today. And I spent a lot of time outside. I love being outside and enjoying the outdoors. And I feel grateful for the type of childhood that I had here.
So were you, you strike me as someone who was a good student in school.
Yes, it's so funny. I graduated, I was number 4 in my class, and the top 3 are incredible humans. Our valedictorian is, I believe he works for Harvard now, I want to say. So he studied polymer science at USM, and now he's working with venture capital firms to develop this prototype in polymer science. And the people that I got to associate with and work with in high school are doing incredible things in our world, not just in our state. So it's really exciting to see.
So you went to college, and you tell me about that selection process and what did you learn there?
Sure. My first choice was the University of Alabama for their public relations school. And, I visited several campuses. I wanted to really get to know where I would possibly be. And going there, I did feel like this could be my future home, that it felt right for me, until I went to LSU and visited for the Spring Invitational, which is essentially a testing program. So you get to test out of classes and a quasi orientation of the campus. And that felt like home. It just embraced me with the Southern Louisiana hospitality that it's famous for. And I fell in love. And I felt like this could be it for me. It's not too far from home, but it's a world away from what I'm used to with a campus of 35,000 students. And it just felt like this is it. This is the right fit.
Yeah, in my time in Louisiana, I got to know the president of LSU well and understood extraordinarily well how unique LSU was really in the United States in that way. If you think about Mississippi, for example, we have Southern USM, where I went to school, Mississippi State, Ole Miss, a bunch of smaller colleges. Certainly they have smaller colleges in Louisiana as well, but the boss hog in Mississippi is LSU. And whereas we have a college board that oversees our state universities, and LSU alone has its own board of trustees. And so they don't have competition at that level. It's a very unique situation. And, it doesn't make it any easier to run a university because you're always going to have your critics and whatever. But the reality is LSU has a very unique relationship with its state that we know well when we play them, when Mississippi universities play the LSU in baseball or football or whatever it may be. They take that stuff seriously, don't they, Erin?
Oh, I had never experienced fandom before, like true fanatical loving a sports team before, until I had my first, Saturday night in Death Valley, where it felt like a religious experience. I mean, I don't know if you've attended one, but it is. People stand up, they sit down, there's like a liturgy. I mean, it really felt like, this is palpable what people are experiencing here. And that's with every sport, though. That's not just football, that's baseball, volleyball. I went to lacrosse games. I mean, there's always something going on campus, especially related to sports. But it's just a very unique community of people. And I really found, again, mentors and friends for life in my short time there.
Well, listen, I was born in Birmingham, Alabama, and my dad was a traveling salesman for a company called Lee Lightner that brought him to Mobile, Pensacola, and then eventually to Gulfport when I was 4, so I consider myself a native. But the rest of his family and my mother's family are still in Alabama, and they all the elders went to Alabama. And I mean, I'm talking about big time Roll Tide fans. Interestingly enough, the grandkids to a person all went to Auburn, including one of my sons went to Auburn. They played baseball at Auburn, and generations played baseball at Auburn. But and then, as irony would have it, I would become president of Alabama Media Group with responsibilities for Birmingham and Huntsville and Mobile, AL.com, et cetera. And we wrote 3 books about Alabama. I literally was publisher of 2 of the books were about the national championships. Yeah. And you're talking about a religious experience. University of Alabama in Alabama is a religious experience because you got people, blue collar workers that never went to school there.
Sure.
That claim that as, you had this on all universities, but it's at a whole nother level when you start talking about Alabama, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And I'll never forget whenever we played the field goal game. Do you remember that one? The 9-6 score whenever LSU won on the road in Tuscaloosa. Yeah. Okay. So Baton Rouge was like set on fire that night in the best way possible. I mean, it's just that rivalry. It cannot be, to me, there's no parallel to it. I mean, I know the Midwest has their rivalries. I get that, but this is a different level, again, of fandom, and we take it very seriously. But I will say, the SEC as a family itself is such a great one, and there's a lot of camaraderie, a lot of competition, but we love each other regardless, and we have to work through the season together. But it's always fun to see that fandom and that base.
Yeah, all of us in my family went to Southern Miss except my son Justin, and he made us all Roll Tide people because excuse me, he will kill me for saying that. War Eagle people, and yeah, we loved Auburn. Auburn was really good to him, and he's done great in his career up in New York City.
Yeah.
So how did you end up at Memorial? How did you end up in communications?
Sure. So I studied public relations, mass communication at LSU. I was really involved in the Public Relations Student Society of America, and that is it's basically the umbrella organization is Public Relations Society of America. So it's the student version, but you get to make those connections that you would if you were part of the adult version, if that makes sense. And so I was highly involved. And whenever I was considering graduation, I thought about internships in Baton Rouge, maybe New Orleans, definitely Mississippi. I was looking for opportunities here. And my mentor at the time and my capstone professor said, you need to apply for this opportunity for Edelman, which is a global PR firm. And I said, all right, I don't believe I can get it, but I'll trust you. And the rest is history because that started my career.
Excellent. We'll pick it up there and talk about her time at Memorial, and then we'll shift gears and talk about this wonderful column that she wrote. That's another stake in the dirt around how young people can be leaders in this state and raise important, conversations that we need to be having. We'll see you after this with Erin Rosetti. Welcome back to the Ricky Mathews Show. I have my friend Erin Rosetti with me. She's a communication expert who works with Memorial. And when we went to break, she was talking about how she was involved in various organizations and then joined the Edelman Group, which I'm familiar with, incidentally. But what I hear from your story, and I said this at the beginning of the show, but is this willingness to not skip steps, to pay your dues along the way and learn in the trenches and whatever. Edelman Group was a great one to learn from. But your mind was ready. Your mind was ready to receive the training necessary to be able to do whatever you might face in your current role at Memorial. But you had to pay your dues. You don't skip steps when you're talking about communication, do you?
No, you don't. And the only way to learn is to experience. And so from a really young age, I've just put myself out there. If no one else is willing to do it, I will. And that can be from the highest level to the lowest level, right? Yeah. I mean, working in a restaurant, you got to do everything. The good things, the not so fun things, not so glamorous. And that gave me the mentality of, I don't care what the job is, I'm going to do it. I'm going to get it done, and it's going to be something I'm proud of. And with communications especially, that has to be your level setting. You have to make sure that you're doing something that you're proud of and it's quality, and that's how you succeed in this field.
Yeah. Erin, one of the things that I was really fortunate, I had the opportunity to work around Pulitzer Prize winning writers and editors. And I got advice early in my career from Roland Weeks that said, he said, I always made A's in writing and English and whatever. But when you get into the real world, what you could say and what would take you 3 pages to say, learning how to say that in a few paragraphs is really the key to successful communication. And one of the things he said, pick you 2 or 3 of the best editors around you and let them help you, not just edit you, but also teach you, how to get better. And I started to do that early in my career. In fact, even to the moment I retired, I always I'd find the best wordsmiths among these incredible journalists that I had around me. And I would always run any important communication by them and see what they thought. As a result of going through that process over the years, over 30 years, it makes you a pretty good communicator after a while. And when I sit down to write something, I often say to myself, boy, the clarity of thought that I'm able to convey did not come overnight. It took years of writing. You just even today, I love to write, but it's something if you don't use it, you will lose it. You have to stay with it and master it. But that's an important message for young people, and even anyone. You might be 90 years old and thinking about improving your writing skills. That's important advice, isn't it?
It is, and you have to have some thick skin. I mean, the first draft is not going to be great, and you have to be okay with that. And you have to be able to take that feedback in stride. And I know saying thick skin, right, that can be frowned upon, but it really is a matter of learning and growing and improving. And if someone's willing to pour into you and give you thoughtful, considerate feedback, it's worth it. I mean, you want to learn that so that you can be better next time. And I'm really grateful for my my director and my VP here, because they are willing to pour into me and take the time to thoroughly review things and give me perspectives that I hadn't considered, and to really be able to discuss the angles that are involved, and that's invaluable.
You can't get better if you're resistant to the feedback. You got to want the feedback. To be a human sponge, a true human sponge, the thick skin is right, but you got to love feedback that is different from what you were thinking. And that's how you improve. That's how you get better. So talk to me about your column. The headline is, "Next Up, the Courage to Build Young Residents Creating a Better Mississippi." I got comments about it. I mean, first of all, I think it was an amazing piece, but I'll interject at some point. Talk to me about sort of the thesis statement for what you wrote.
Mississippi, especially, in the light of young people, the angle is usually everyone's leaving. They're leaving in droves. The talent is gone, or it's fleeting, or it'll never come back. And I'm tired of it. I'm so tired of it, because it doesn't acknowledge the people that are here, that are doing the work, that are uplifting our communities and our state, and are working so hard to try to shift the narrative and to give our world something else to talk about than just the negative here.
Yeah, boy, is that true? Is that true? Like, look, this show's not political, and so I'm not going to make it political. But whether you're a Democrat or a Republican in this state, no matter what position you hold in the state, from the highest level to a point in the legislature, or maybe you have influence over those people, we've got to do better. I mean, we just have to do better. One of the things that I talk a lot about is the Delta, Mississippi Delta. I spend a lot of time in the Mississippi Delta. And the reality of the Mississippi Delta is that if you were to take the Mississippi Delta out of the numbers, Mississippi would be somewhere in the middle, probably, as it relates to, where we rank on most things. But because we have not wrestled with the Mississippi Delta from an economic point of view, we still wrestle with rural areas of Mississippi. Mississippi is a very rural state. You name it, whether it's economic development, whether it's access to health care, which is a huge issue in this state. All these things are important, but we still have an image problem. I find myself, Erin, when I leave, and this has been throughout my career, when I'm leading corporate efforts for the various companies that I work for, I would often give a little bit of a speech about Mississippi ahead of time to explain that what you have in your mind may not necessarily be what actually is happening here, and I explained that to them. And I wrote a column recently, after the Delta tornadoes, and how we all come together and how resilient we are, what we learned about ourselves after Hurricane Katrina. I wrote about it in Governor Barber's book about Hurricane Katrina. But then our leaders do things. They say things. Which in some respects, whatever they do and say, sometimes they set us back. They're not adjusted to the reality of where we are. A lot of times it's a political calculus that they say it, but I often say about that, if it is a political calculus, what does that say about how they see us? We're not aligned enough around everyone having the responsibility to overcome that perception that we too often fight. And, the rest of us are actually doing a pretty good job of dealing with issues that we've struggled with early in our Mississippi history. Don't you see it the same way?
I do. I really do. And it's not a matter of, and I know there's a lot of discussion about being too woke or, tone deaf or whatever the case may be. It's about being good people and good humans and helping each other, because at the end of the day, we should care about our fellow human, no matter where they come from, what they look like, what their socioeconomic status is. We need to do better in caring for the people that are around us. And Mississippi is a microcosm for that. I mean, we could be doing so much more to help the most vulnerable, the people that need support, and to help. And as we discuss, not just providing help and support, but making sure that it's in lockstep with there being future success. You see what I'm saying? So it's not just giving someone something. It's not just a handout. I know we talk about that too. And that's something that, is a lightning rod. But we have got to find a way to really support and help those that are around us and give them a trajectory that's positive. Because it's just, it seems like it's just not happening the way that it needs to.
Listen, I had a great conversation with Shari Davis, who owns the Jackson Pearl in Ocean Springs, and she's from California. They sold their business in California and moved here, her and her husband. And they had the Bootleg Howl in a bed and breakfast in Biloxi as well. But I actually ended up pulling this segment out of my show because what she said was so powerful. And she was saying the differences between where she came from and here and what she saw in the heart and soul of Mississippians. And she said it didn't matter where you came from or who you were or who you loved, you were accepted and you were loved. And the way she talked about it was so, it was so, I think we need more people to come in from the outside and reflect on back to us what they see in us when they get here, because we see it after disasters like Katrina, like the tornadoes in the Mississippi Delta. There are so many other situations where we see that, but Mississippians as a general rule reach out and they care about their neighbor and they help their neighbor, etc. I worry in our state that we're not having enough conversations about how to bring everybody together, that we get bought into sort of these national narratives. And as a result, we end up getting polarized, and the polarizing ends too often define the agenda. One that applies to your industry, and this is not to sort of drag this one into the conversation, but I don't think we've had an honest conversation about Medicaid expansion in this state, for example. Right. People, put a political stake in the ground about that, and we're saying no to $1 million. And my point about that simply is that if you were to say that you could get $1 million a year and $1 billion a year, we would be holding special sessions of the legislature to grab that money, because as we wrote about when I was in Louisiana, and the governor of Louisiana accepted Medicaid expansion, is that the economic impact of that alone is a big, and it's not the solution. The healthcare system's going through an entire re-engineering currently. Mississippi needs to do that as well to understand how does all these pieces fit together, but Medicaid expansion is a big part of that. But we won't even think about it. It's amazing to me that we can't come together on something so vital in a rural state like Mississippi and say no to that much money. It just doesn't look smart when we do that. Hey, when we come back on the other side, we'll continue our conversation with Erin Rosetti. Welcome back to my show, and I'm visiting with Erin Rosetti, who wrote a really compelling piece for SuperTalk Mississippi News, a Next Up column. And, let me read a little segment to you. You said this: also, get comfortable being uncomfortable. The young people in my community are making the biggest difference. Our business owners and community advocates who are working every day to provide unique experiences for residents and our visitors, specifically those who are amplifying our diversity and ensuring all people feel welcome in the state. We should commit ourselves to this mission of acceptance and understanding if we want to see our state thrive. And you go on from there and talk about brain drain and whatever, but again, it's sort of like it's a paradox, because most people sort of get that, but sometimes the leaders, whether they be Democratic leaders or Republican leaders, they're creating these polarizing ends when the majority of us, I don't care if you're a Republican or Democrat, are somewhere in the middle, and we see how we should get along and we should address these issues. We may disagree on some of these policy discussions, but the point of disagreeing before we ever even have the conversation, we got to get past that, and we got to get in the trenches and be courageous, and we have to be willing to be uncomfortable. Isn't that true?
Yes, absolutely. And what really inspired that part of the piece for me was whenever I was at Coastal Mississippi, Visit Mississippi Gulf Coast prior to Coastal Mississippi, as a public relations manager. And I would host media from globally, throughout the world, not just nationally. And one of the writers that I had here was here for one specific story, very interested in something that was a little more puff piece related. And then once he got here, it was literally weeks after House Bill 1523 was passed, the religious freedom bill, and the stickers that say everyone in downtown areas were displayed on windows. And so whenever he would walk into a restaurant or wherever, he saw this everyone sticker, and he asked the owner that was there, "What's this for?" And they said, "We don't want anyone to think that they can't come in here." because of their gender or their sexual orientation, whatever it might be. We want them to feel comfortable being here because everyone is welcome here. And so he wrote this beautiful piece about Mississippi isn't what you think it is, and this is why. And that really inspired me to write about this subject in particular. There are people that are making bold decisions and being super courageous, and it's working. It's working. It's helping.
Yeah, I've actually written a piece about courage. In fact, I was watching Ed Sheeran's documentary recently, and it's a really good documentary about what it takes to be successful, et cetera. But his wife, Sherry, at some point during it, starts to reflect with Ed about what will people say about me when I'm gone. And it got me reflecting about myself. And, it's interesting because I went through a lot of iterations about this. But the one thing I would want people to say about me, Erin, is that I had the courage to speak up, that I had the courage to tackle the tough issues when others weren't willing to do that. And this is something that I challenged at the One Coast Awards the year before last. That we have got to quit grabbing hold of the status quo and protecting that. We've got to be willing to have these bold conversations that are sometimes, as you pointed out, uncomfortable to have. But address them. And what I love about the Next Up column and what you're doing with your fellow CYP members is raising these important questions to say, these are the things we're thinking about. You need to think about them too. These are apolitical conversations that we should be having. Right. They should not be had within the context of politics. We should be having them because they're important to have. They speak to the perception of Mississippi. They speak to the reality of who we really are as a people. And that oftentimes there's a disconnect between the national perception, which affects our ability to attract people here, and what's really happening on the ground. And we're just not having that conversation. Too often doesn't seem to be even a concern about it. In fact, I would go so far as to say some of our leaders do things that only serve to push those perceptions and make them more crystal clear to those people on the outside, even though it's not real. Unfortunately, that's where we are. But I really appreciate you weighing in. One of the things that you and I will do in future conversations is zero in. In fact, I'm actually going to structure a show around courage and invite some of you guys to be involved. I may bring somebody like Jerry St. Pay into the conversation, but I want a group conversation about courage and the need for more courage. And I think something like that could make a difference. What kind of feedback have you gotten?
Overwhelmingly just positive. I shared it to my personal networks, and especially people that have moved away, have reached out to me and, have expressed that this is exactly what I feel. This is how I feel. This is how I talk about our home. The reputation of Mississippi precedes me, but I try to change whoever I meet. I change their perception in every interaction I have. And so it's resonating not just with people here, but people elsewhere who are proud of Mississippi and want to be for good reason, but also understand that there are a lot of challenges that we face here. And, we need to be part of that conversation as young people. We need to be involved.
Everyone in the state, from the governor down to every single person in every single community, should share a burden for everything we communicate and everything we say outside the state, that it be consistent with what actually is occurring in the state. And that is, there are so many amazing people here who care about each other and care about the reputation of this state. And we want to project the progress that we have made. We can always make more progress, but we want to project that progress, and we don't do enough of that. Anyway, awesome conversation, Erin. I can't wait to chat with you again in the near future. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me.
You bet. This has been Erin Rosetti. Awesome conversation. Anyway, have a great day, and we will see you tomorrow.